even more to make Thunderclap very difficult to use. Raging Bolt looks like it would have such a hard time in this matchup, so we may just not see it from Rushiel.
I mean, going into this right away, that King Gambit making an appearance out on the field, and when there's an Incineroar on the opposing end with the Intimidate, that's a King Gambit right away with an attack boost.
Yeah, I mean, what a risk. Leading out Incineroar, knowing the King Gambit's on the other side, but some of that might just be respecting how difficult it might be to fight against the Chien Pao lead if you don't have early Intimidate against it, but instead, King Gambit already off to the races, and crucially, with Amoonguss to support it, because you might say, hey, I'm okay with giving over that boost because I'll just have Urshifu on the field, and I'll immediately threaten close combat fake out to help with that. But now the Amoonguss can support there. You can use a defensive Trastalization to take one close combat, you can use Redirection to take more, and you can really try to push this King Gambit, but it'll cost a lot of resources from Joe if he wants to do it, but it looks like that's the game plan. Dragon Trastalization, immediately King Gambit with that boost going to stay on the field.
I mean, it's a lot of resources, but once again, we are okay committing to try and take momentum early on in this match. No Rage Powder, though. Amoonguss instead is just going to be the target. Rushiel maybe thinking that it was just going to be Amoonguss anyways, maybe just trying to prioritize and get us off the field as soon as possible with a double up. Noticeably, no fake out coming out from the Incineroar either. So Flare Blitz, that is the follow-up. Amoonguss doesn't have to go for a Rage Powder because it was always just going to be the intended target, and Amoonguss goes down. Now, King Gambit, you have the attack boost. You've spent the Trastalization. Make sure that you aren't taking a lot of damage on this turn. You have to make the most of it. But Kowtow Cleave into Tapu, Pokemon that resisted. Urshifu takes the hit so well.
Yeah, I really like this game plan from Rushiel, recognizing that the big part of the problem of the King Gambit is the support next to it, and so just prioritizing getting rid of it. Using Surging Strikes plus Flare Blitz to do that means you never activate the Citrus Berry, you don't take a defense drop on Urshifu, and you just get rid of it without having to worry about Spore or Redirection in the future. And meanwhile, like you said, you don't take much damage back because you've got 2 Dark Resists sitting on your side of the field. 2 Dark and Steel Resist.
All right, so the King Gambit doesn't do too much. Dragonite on the opposing end definitely can. Of course, with the Choice Band and the Stomping Tantrum is enough to just drop the Incineroar on this turn. And of course, the Urshifu doesn't take any damage, but we're going to even it up a KO apiece.
Quick damage trades coming out. This is just as fast-paced as that last game. 1 KO height for both players so far. We do see Raging Bolt in the back alongside Flutter Mane, so Flutter Mane would be helpful against the extreme speed, but right now that's not what the Dragonite's locked into. It's locked into Stomping Tantrum, which makes it a lot more difficult to bring in that Raging Bolt. You'd immediately be worried about Choice Band super effective Stomping Tantrum, so instead Flutter Mane hits the field. It is helpful for Flutter Mane that King Gambit's already gone for Dragon Trastalization, so you have 2 choices of Dragon there, and you don't have to worry about defensive Trastalization from Dragonite, so you can get quite a bit of damage out, even with probably a more supportive, fast Flutter Mane here. Meanwhile, Urshifu should also get a chance to attack. Should be faster than both of these Pokemon. You don't have to worry about any priority at the moment. You resist the Sucker Punch, and Extreme Speed isn't an option because of the lock into the Stomping Tantrum.
That's one of the things with that Choice Band Dragonite is, sure, you're dealing so much extra damage, but the Stomping Tantrum that looked so good into the Incineroar kind of falls a little bit flat now in the face of these 2 Pokemon. So Dragonite forced to kind of switch out to be able to lock into something different down the line, and Chien Pao to hit the field instead. This is going to bring the Sword of Ruin to defense dropped on the opposing Pokemon, and when you do have a King Gambit next to you with a priority move, a way to try and get around it, Flutter Mane instantly drops to that, and that is going to be huge. That had so much pressure into this King Gambit. Probably one of the best ways to deal with it. Close combat brings it down to 1/3 of its health, but now Urshifu, it's already taken damage, and it has a defense and special defense drop.
Sometimes the best defense is the best offense. Joe's stuck with 3 Fairy Weak Pokemon. No way to get a defensive Trastalization to help with that, but you know what? Just KO the Flutter Mane, then you don't have a problem anymore. Sword of Ruin and the +1 attack from that early Intimidate on King Gambit, being enough damage to close that out. Meanwhile, yeah, the close combat does extra damage to King Gambit, but you're okay with this. This is a pretty valuable trade. King Gambit's still going to get to go out on the offensive again, and now you force Raging Bolt on the field, so you know what all the pieces you have to deal with are, and Raging Bolt just doesn't position very well here. It's weak to, ice moves from Chien Pao, the Ice Spinner, but also to Stomping Tantrum from Dragonite if it wants to do it, and then you have problems with Extreme Speed as well. The saving grace there might be that even if Extreme Speed can get to Urshifu, you'll buy time for Dragon Pulse. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. That's several turns away. In the meantime, you've got to first get rid of these 2 Pokemon out on the field, even get that Dragonite back out there.
And Terrestrialization for Rushiel finally within this match onto the Raging Bolt. Very tight, so you're going to take a Sucker Punch a lot better as well in the end game. make sure, like, an outrage. So this is just a good one to be spending right about now, as well, dropping weakness to ice moves. First hit, Qian Pao, that's going to make sure it's broken. And with the priority, nothing comes out from this King Gambit. Ice Spinner, as the follow-up, defensive terrestrialization is going to be showing up big, brings it down to about half of its damage. Now Dragon Ball, super effective now with that terrestrialization, is going to bring Joe down to his final 2 Pokemon.
A really strong turn from Rushiel to both dodge the Sucker Punch, not take any extra damage on that turn, use the defensive terrestrialization to further mitigate the damage coming in, and then accomplish 2 pretty important goals. You get the Focus Sash broken on the Qian Pao, and you get the KO on the King Gambit. It was a little bit of a sitting duck, right? It was slow and low health, but when it's at +1 and threatening Sucker Punches, it's always still an obstacle to get over. So successfully navigates that, gets it off the field. But meanwhile, now you have these 2 classic Pokemon together. Qian Pao and Dragonite can threaten so much damage. You immediately have the extreme speed threat from Dragonite into Urshifu. That probably means that Urshifu doesn't ever get to attack again. And then you got to be unsure what to do with Raging Bolt. Really dangerous to Thunderclap here. You probably just won't get a safe target.
And now that, although it pop off from Joe already, so Raging Bull protects, but I think Joe's more than okay with that extreme speed into the Urshifu instead. As you said, Choice Band with that Sword of Ruin is enough for the KO. Free just momentum for Joe on this turn, 2v1 now, and Raging Bolt all by itself. Joe's 1 Pokemon away from closing this out.
Right, you can see the inputs from Joe. So the Sucker Punch and the Extreme Speed would have meant that Thunderclap couldn't even work. The risk was then the Dragon Pulse comes out. The Raging Bolt doesn't do either. It just protects itself. Joe gets the KO onto Urshifu and should just now have it closed up, because you've got to take an Extreme Speed and a Ice Spinner before you can even get a Dragon Pulse off. It's not a sure thing that Dragon Pulse from this more bulky leftovers Raging Bolt is even a KO into either of these Pokemon.
So yeah, we see it first off, Extreme Speed, Raging Bolt brought down to quite low health, and the follow-up Sucker Punch. Raging Bolt holds on with 3 HP, so we'll get to discover, all right, we'll not get to discover anything actually. Failed Thunderclap. We'll still have to wonder about that Dragon Pulse down the line, and Joe, we just get to go again, but this time secure the game with a KO.
Yeah, you can see the problems for Raging Bolt in this matchup. With so much faster priority on the other side, Thunderclap is never a safe button to press. And so then you're in this mind game. It's like, I would still like the value of Thunderclap. Like, if I think it can land, then it's an option, but you can just get failed turns out of it. And meanwhile, Raging Bolt just going to get bullied down here, only ever having accomplished that Dragon Pulse in the King Gambit. It ended up being kind of a weak point for Shield here, because you go back, remember that it also is the thing that forced Flutter Mane onto the field. Because Raging Bolt would have been such a sitting duck into the Stomping Tantrum, it kind of forced Flutter Mane to be the bring in, which just let it get one hit KO'd by Sucker Punch on the next turn. So ended up being kind of a momentum trap for Shield here.
I mean, at this point, taking this opportunity to think about a game 2 with Raging Bolt, it will be a protect, but again, so low health, nothing to do up against this double priority that Joe has. So we can also pose that question about going into a game 2, what we can see, because you kind of posed already the difficulties with this Raging Bolt. So is it going to be a Pokemon adjustment going on forward, something that can maybe deal with the offense from Joe a little bit better?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see a Pokemon adjustment. Ogerpon obviously looks like it could have been fairly strong in this matchup, especially if you're willing to pair it with Rillaboom to get Grassy Glide priority online as well, so that you can swing out with that. I think the other adjustment to make is to, rethink how willing you are to give away that Defiant boost. At different points in that game, it looked like it was a bad idea or a good idea, right? On turn 1, it looked like it was pretty reasonable. You gave it up, but you didn't take too much damage. You got the KO into Amoonguss. You took an early lead. But then the Sucker Punch being a 1-hit KO into Flutter Mane, a Pokemon that we talked about before the match, can be so impactful here against Joe, because he has so many very weak Pokemon, so many Pokemon that don't want to take Icy Wind. And so not being able to keep that Flutter Mane safe for even one turn was a high cost to pay, because you gave up the Defiant boost on turn 1.
Especially, too, with this Flutter Mane, it is a bit more of that defensive set, but with it being a defensive set, we also see the terrestrialization be into the grass type. So it wasn't even like there was the option to tear it into the fairy type, which would have been able to survive past that turn, right? So it was kind of a little bit of a tough one. So I'd love to see if it is going to be a Pokemon adjustment, bring something other than the Raging Bolt, or even just the leads, because also Incineroar, sure, the 2 Pokemon to start off was enough to take care of the Amoonguss, which you had highlighted of King Gambit next to the Amoonguss is an issue. But again, it wasn't enough to stop the King Gambit from getting away with it later on in the match either.
Part of the reason that early prioritization of being willing to lead the Incineroar to have damage against the Amoonguss and then going after the Amoonguss was so important was because Spore was such a big threat. Now, none of the Pokemon that Rushiel brought were immune to it, because both grass types were left back at home. So that's another adjustment you could think about making, like maybe I shift it so that I don't have to prioritize damage into Amoonguss if I'm more willing to give Amoonguss free turns.
I mean, we'll have to see something switch up here going into game number 2 to try and take this to a game number 3 for Rochelle. A switch up from Joe as well. King Gambit led again, no support. But going into it, no switch up from Rochelle. So now Intimidate, that is again a defiant boost going over to this King Gambit. And when it's next to the Dragon Knight, this Dragon Knight isn't that multi-scale, it's the inner focus. So this Intimidate's just only helped Joe.
I mean, this is a terrifying situation for Rochelle because you don't even know which Pokemon is this going to swing out on the offense. King Gambit just got that boost, but he doesn't have great targets. And so you have to also be very worried that that's just going to be a switch to Chien-Pao, and Dragon Knight threatening massive extreme speed that you can't fake out would probably just be a KO into Urshifu, especially if you commit a Terra Normal. We talked about how there are no normal resists on Rochelle's team, only the Flutter Mane to try to take it, and so you can very quickly get into a point where Dragon Knight is just running you over. But meanwhile, if you don't respect the King Gambit now and let it have free damage, that could also be a problem. But yeah, no switch. Once again, the King Gambit going to keep itself safe from a close combat with the Dragon Terastallization.
Yeah, again, with the fact it's the Dragon Terastallization instead of that Dark type offensive Terastallization, gives this King Gambit so much more staying power, especially against this duo. So close combat is just going to be a neutral hit. That's the defense lowered now going on forward. And even a follow-up from the Incineroar, it doesn't really have great staying power. Choice Band, that Stomping Tantrum does so much damage. It will get a little bit of recovery with that Citrus Berry, which could be the difference when you're sitting across from this King Gambit. But still, this King Gambit can pack a punch. Knockoff, though, it's going to do a little bit less with the Black Glasses later on with the Sucker Punch, which should be interesting, and even more so now. So combination of hits, not enough to be taking down this Incineroar.
An interesting turn. Joe may be hoping to pick up the KO on Incineroar, but with the Citrus Berry, the Stomping Tantrum just wasn't enough damage, and so Incineroar stays on the field. Meanwhile, Urshifu did opt to drop its defense this turn, so it would have been a more vulnerable target, but no extreme speed, no targeting from King Gambit into the Urshifu slot. Instead, it gets away with that for free and is now threatening, despite the defensive Terastallization, a close combat KO into King Gambit on this turn. So that's going to force a Sucker Punch out that still does some good damage, but less than 50% to Urshifu.
Yeah, it's definitely not the same amount of damage we saw in game number 1. So King Gambit finally goes down. Notably as well, Dragonite sticks around on the field, not opting to reset. And with a double lowered defense coming out from the Urshifu, maybe Joe trying to make sure that you do enough damage into the Urshifu, you can try and follow it up. So Stomping Tantrum, Urshifu, -2 defense will go down. So trading 1-for-1 on this turn. Now Incineroar, last to act, will be a parting shot. So making sure that the Dragonite does less down the line, but still with the choice locked Dragonite, I don't even think a switch on the next turn is the worst idea.
Switch is not so bad, but this game is playing at such a high pace, so much damage every turn, that a switch is a pretty high cost. And so being able to force one is pretty helpful. You're also much happier to get Incineroar out into the back, knowing that the King Gambit is gone now. If you can get an Intimidate into Chien-Pao in the future, that could be pretty valuable. And in the parting shot, the one way to mitigate Dragonite's offense in this game, because you can't intimidate it. And so I think a pretty solid turn there. And yeah, Joe could have had a much easier path to KOing the Urshifu with just extreme speed starting from the first turn, but maybe thought the Urshifu was going to protect or switch and wanted to prioritize damage into Incineroar, and so ends up paying kind of a lot more resources to get the same KO along with some damage into the Incineroar.
So now we do have to see a run back of the Raging Bolt, but with the King Gambit gone and kind of the board state we're sitting down with Dragonite and Amoonguss, how does this switch things up? Because this Raging Bolt, we never got to see how much damage it could threaten into this Dragonite, and at -1, the Stomping Tantrum is still threatening, but not like the same.
It'll be an interesting decision to see whether Joe just sticks with it because it's still a good damage threat, but no, wants to get the boost back to the attack and get away from this Dragon Pulse. And so Chien-Pao is going to come out, but that's going to, not be the favorite thing to take Dragon Pulse either. A pretty high cost for this switch.
Well, at least, yeah, we'll have to see. Fake Out, Amoonguss, Dragon Pulse. It's not going to be a KO or potential of it into a Dragonite, but there's still a lot of damage. But Chien-Pao does have the speed going on forward. Yeah,
Chien-Pao has the speed, so you'd love to aim a Thunderclap at it, but this is such a risky situation. Both Rage Powder and Sucker Punch prevent Thunderclap. So this is that situation where you know how valuable it'd be if you could land it, but do you dare risk it? Meanwhile, Amoonguss is threatened here. A Dragon Pulse and a Flare Blitz would just pick up that KO if you think you can get away with it for a turn, but Chien-Pao is threatening a lot of offense. Looks like it's going to force a defensive Terastallization onto the Raging Bolt. Onto the Incineroar here, trying to keep it around through the turn.
I mean, big nods coming out from the opposing end, and sure, you might have dropped some typings, but with an Ice Spinner instead, Ghost Terastallization's not going to be helping you there. Incineroar goes down, second Pokemon taken from Rochelle. Have to see how much momentum this Raging Bolt can do on the turn, and Dragon Pulse will be out. So it will be a 1-for-1 trade yet again, and it's going to be ending up with just the Amoonguss Dragonite over on Joe's end.
This is a free turn for Amoonguss. This should just be a Spore. Yeah, so Raging Bolt paying a very high cost for this.
So yeah, the 2v2 going on forward, but it's kind of a 2v1.5 because Raging Bolt, especially too since it's already acted, it's required to sleep on this next turn.
Yeah, at the pace this game is playing, having a sleeping Raging Bolt is such a big cost. Now, Fluttermane, though, is probably the perfect Pokemon to have here because you don't have to worry about extreme speed. Makes it really tricky for Dragonite what to do here. And you can threaten Icy Wind that gets past the Rage Powder, or you can just taunt the Amoonguss to prevent Spore. So I think a pretty useful piece.
As well, it's going to be interesting because with this Dragonite, again, choice item locked, and the two ways to be hitting this Fluttermane are not necessarily the craziest options, right? So Icy Wind, so safe, a good chunk of damage into this Dragonite, and that's going to be the first turn of sleep now for this Raging Bolt, faster than the options on Joe's end. Forced into a Stomping Tantrum, how much damage is going to do? Not quite enough. With the combination, though, still not quite there.
Yeah, Joe must have thought that was enough damage because otherwise you Spore the Fluttermane to make sure it can't attack again, but instead doesn't pick up the KO. Now Icy Wind is going to get to go off again, and this is a situation where the Icy Wind speed drops onto Dragonite are relevant because it's not locked into extreme speed. If you can get Raging Bolt faster, then it can wake into a Dragon Pulse before the Dragonite can move.
And it's going to be a Rage Powder, but again, with this dual hit attack, it's not going to matter. Dragonite is brought down to just a little bit of health. If it doesn't wake up from the Raging Bolt, it will be redirected into the Amoonguss. That's going to be your bit of a saving grace there, but still so much done into the Dragonite. Is it going to be a wake up from the Raging Bolt, though? That's going to be the first question, and no, that's the second turn of sleep. Now Stomping Tantrum, Fluttermane so low, it's going to be down to a 2v1. But again, a Raging Bolt that maybe wakes up next turn.
Right, but wakes up with only single target moves that have to be redirected by Rage Powder, and likely takes 2 moves to KO Dragonite, or to KO Amoonguss rather, which gives Dragonite so much time here. Dragonite has escaped the spread moves, has escaped the Icy Wind with a sliver of health that should be enough to close this out.
And Amoonguss, center of attention. Raging Bolt does wake up, but is forced to target into this Amoonguss. And yeah, without a critical hit, Amoonguss sticks around. Stomping Tantrum now in return. This is full HP, but brought down well below half. One more will be able to pick up the KO.
Yes, it would have taken just one extra turn. The Raging Bolt waking up sooner, or maybe critical hitting the Amoonguss in order to get that KO, but now you know what's going to happen. Raging Bolt can only use a single target move that will be redirected by Amoonguss, and that Stomping Tantrum is coming. You would need so many turns of leftovers to get past it. It's just not going to happen. So Dragonite, with its reduced speed, is still going to be able to close this out.
Yep, so Rage Powder yet again. Make sure this Dragonite can safely go through the turn as, yeah, nothing coming out from this Raging Bolt. Stomping Tantrum, the last little bit of damage needed, and with that, Joseph Ugarte 2-0 to take the set and land himself here at top cut at the Seattle Regional Championships.
Oh boy, it was close. It felt like a lot of turns. Joe didn't get exactly what he wanted out of them, but he got just enough out of them. Didn't get the KO into Flutter.